live at the moment, the South Wales Metro, but I thought I would go back and actually have a little bit of a think about what's happened in the past. So this is, you probably all know far more actually about the South Wales Metro than I do. So this is very much sort of taken from the press releases, from the which we as a historical society are actually trying to capture, because what's current today will be tomorrow's history. So some of this is actually taken from material that's actually on Transport for Wales website, it's on some of their press releases. It's an ambitious multi-million-pound project, which we all know about. The important thing is it's an integrated public transport network that will make it easier for people to travel across the Cardiff capital region, transforming not only rail, but also bus services, and actually linking it into other initiatives such as active travel. So that's bringing forward cycling and walking and trying to create that connectivity, which perhaps has been lacking today. So it's very much about making public transport easier to use, to get around, to work, to school, etc., etc. So it really is trying to create that integrated system, which perhaps we haven't seen for some time. Thank you. So this is, I'm sure you've seen this or versions of it before. This is the entirety of the South Wales Metro map. So extending over to Maesteg and Porthcawl in the west, right the way over to Chepstow and Abergavenny in the east, and linking across the heads of the valleys, Treherbert, Hirwaun, so on and so forth. So that starts to build up that network approach, which is being used by the South Wales Metro, by Transport for Wales, to actually pull together this integrated system, centred, of course, on, next slide, the railway system. So here we have our metro railway map, if you like. So again, Maesteg, Bridgend in the west, Penarth, Barry Island, up to Abergavenny, Merthyr in the north. Bear this map in mind, because I'll be coming back to this in a little while. So, excuse me, obviously we have what's now being called the Core Valleys network, plus the more peripheral areas where different types of rolling stock are actually going to be introduced. Okay, now one of the big things which happened 4 years ago now, believe it or not, was Transport for Wales actually took ownership of the Core Valleys network. Aberdare, Corriton, Merthyr, Rumney and Treherbert were transferred from Network Rail to Transport for Wales to enable work to start on delivering the metro. Work's ongoing. It's the first 231s arrived in January last year, and most of the work, I believe, is scheduled for completion this year. Fingers crossed. So let's hope that that's the case. So £800 million, I said multi-million-pound project, new infrastructure for Wales and Borders. The first 231s has arrived. I think there's more than two here now. I think. In fact, I saw one actually on the way in at Heath High Level. The first of the 36 Class 398 tram trains have also been delivered, and they'll be rolled out over the next few months. Yeah. So
the flirt's now taken over the Rumney line.
Yes, that's right. Yes, so I did see one just going up northwards from Heath High Level as I came in on the train. So we're starting to see this next generation of rolling stock starting to have an impact upon the Core Valleys network. Okay, and of course we have the new tram train metro depot that's being constructed in Taftswell. I thought this was quite a nice sort of diagrammatic view of it. I think it pretty much does reflect that, in a general sense. We haven't got quite as many tram trains available as yet, but it's certainly well in progress as I drove down, passing Taftswell on the way in tonight. So it's really come on in leaps and bounds, certainly over the last 2 or 3 months since I was last in Cardiff. So it's really nice to see that there is this dynamic here now to actually bring this project to conclusion this year, all being well. Okay, next slide. So of that 800 million, 100 million is actually being spent in Taftswell. We've got Metro Depot and also the control centre. The 36 Metro trams will be based there, and it will also be home, I believe, to over 400 members of staff, which is a large contingent of people moving into the Taftswell area. The connection went in beginning of February, and the first Metro tram trains have started arriving now. Behind the depot is that integrated control centre, which is currently being fitted out. There'll be 52 staff based there on the new modern signalling system for the core Valley Lines network. And I believe they also have some sort of customer interface there as well. So lots going on in Taftswell over the next few months as all this starts to be commissioned and come on stream. Okay, so that was taken a little while ago. So again, this is taken from the Metro Transport for Wales website, showing how developments are continuing apace. Sort of got this sort of loop effect that so that things can come in and work their way around. That, I assume, is the control centre in the bottom left. So things really are developing apace. Of course, in a historical perspective, what we did lose from this location was the wonderful Rumney Railway engine shed, which used to provide banking engines up the big hill to Caerphilly. But world moves on, so it's nice to see this facility coming on stream. Okay. A little bit about the tram trains. Again, I'll come back to some of this a little bit later on. Both overhead line equipment and battery power, quieter than current trains, no surprise there. They're designed to operate on conventional existing railway lines and also as trams on any future metro extensions which may come forward. What's quite interesting is the anticipated frequency of the trains, and Transport for Wales indicate that 12 trains per hour between Pontypridd and Cardiff, which will be quite a significant increase in frequency compared to the current status. And of course, they can double up and to increase capacity as necessary. So a lot going on, and to enable this frequency to be achieved going forward. Each of the 36 tram trains are 3 carriages long, seat 126 passengers, with a total of 252. 4 bicycle spaces per tram train, maybe a bit low given the intention to have much more active travel linkages in, but they do have those level boarding ramps to significantly improve accessibility, which again is very important in this day and age. So lovely new trains coming in from Switzerland, and there's the first couple, which I think that was posted last week by Transport for Wales. So the first 2 tram trains, 398, located at Taftswell, there in all their glory. So bring on the other 34, I think is the answer to that. A lot more now. It's a lot more now. I'm sure it is. I'm sure they're coming today. Yes, I'm sure they're coming in faster than I can keep up with. So yes, so it's nice to see them starting to arrive. Okay, but now, so that's the model bit out of the way. But is the metro really a new idea? Probably not. And we need to roll back now almost 125 years to the start of the 20th century. South Wales was dominated by a whole series of independent railway companies, the Taff Vale, the Rumney, the Ban, all of whom were seeking to develop their passenger network. This was fairly typical of the type of train which roamed the network, if you like, at the time. Steam driven, obviously, 4- and 6-wheel carriages, relatively slow, trying to fit in between the coal traffic. 1914 was when the export of the coal reached its peak. So right at the start of the 20th century, the coal traffic was still growing, but they were still starting to think about how to accelerate their trains, improve their network, and start to build the passenger mileage, if you like, even though it was the coal which really made all the money. Now, how did they go about doing it? One of the big issues which starts to emerge in the late 19th, early 20th century were vast improvements in electrical technology. The first experimental electric tramway was developed in St. Petersburg in Russia in 1875, became a commercial success in Berlin just 6 years later. 2 years after that, Vaux Electric Railway, slide there, was running along Brighton Sea Front. By 1891, we had the first UK street tramway in Leeds. So things were moving at pace. Again, I've used that phrase a few times, as these electrical systems were very, very quickly developed over the space of 20 years to become really a viable option for mass transit. And that really started to concentrate the mind of railway companies, not only in the UK, but around the world. In South Wales, the horse tram system had been operating in Cardiff from 1872. That was due to be electrified in 1903. In Pontypridd and the Rhondda Valleys, that had been a horse tram work a few years later from 1887. February 1902, it closed abruptly because most of the horses died of a disease called glanders, which was really put the mockers on it. But it was then taken over by the then Urban District Council with a view to electrify it. So from between 1900 and 1904, we started to see the rollout of the electric tram system, not only in Cardiff, but also in the South Wales valleys, or parts of the South Wales valleys. And it was recognised this would have a significant impact potentially upon passenger traffic by the independent railways. What we need to do now is just jump over to North East England. This chap here, Sir Vincent Raven, of the North Eastern Railway, he was probably one of the leading proponents of actually bringing forward alternative forms of traction to encourage that network. He began his career, as it says there, in 1877 as a pupil, as an apprentice really, the North Eastern Railway to the then locomotive superintendent Edward Fletcher. By 1893, he'd achieved the post of assistant mechanical engineer to Wilson Worsdale. And it was really in that post that he started to really advocate the delivery of electric traction. He then went on to replace Worsdale in 1910. But whilst the assistant mechanical engineer, he was very much advocating new approaches to bringing forward traction. Okay. So he saw the advantages of electric traction. He had started to see the appearance of electric tramcars on the streets of Britain. They had superior acceleration. They had better hill climbing abilities. They could sustain the power longer term. He'd also seen the development of electric traction in the London Underground. So the city in South London opened as an electric railway in 1890. It basic to begin with, but very quickly improved. The Central London Railway opened in 1900, again as an electric railway, and the Metropolitan and District Railways were both electrified 2 or 3 years later. So you see this big push with electric traction, certainly in the capital, and it was very much seen that this could be rolled out to a much wider, more suburban environment. Okay, so this is a picture of what the Central London Railway looked like in 1900. All mod cons, as you can see. My moustache with my driver. Relatively high density rolling stock. The tendency to use gates because that allowed people to embark and disembark very quickly. The idea was rapid turnover of passengers getting on, getting off. It was operated by standalone electric locomotives, but again, you'd already figured out that fast accelerations and slowing down. They had electric brakes, so on and so forth. So much of the technology, arguably, we're seeing today had already been sorted out by 1900. And obviously, as you know, the London Underground went on to be electrified throughout. So lots were happening very early in the 20th century. However, Raven thought, well, crumbs, that's going to be quite expensive. So he decided to dabble a little bit in a slightly different technology, and he went in 1903 for a pair of what he termed autocars. So instead of drawing electricity from the overhead or from third rail, with attendant costs of putting in that infrastructure, he went for a petrol-electric approach with a petrol engine driving a dynamo which supplied power to the electric motors. This was the world's first use of internal combustion in a passenger carrying rail vehicle. Petrol engines, although still in their infancy, have developed sufficiently to provide reliable power, whereas diesel engines were still some way off and incredibly large. Two autocars were constructed, numbered 3170 and 3171, and they were also again fitted with electric track brakes. They were first in railway use. So he was really pushing at the forefront of technology in 1902, 1903. And this is what one of them looks like. So this is one of the North Eastern Railway 1903 petrol electric autocars. It probably stands up quite well compared to some of the other things we've had seen in a not too distant past. Yes, we've got wooden body and separate underframes and all the rest of it, but the concept is instantly recognisable as something that's relatively modern. And they were designed to be flexible. They could and often did work with driving trailers, which obviously doubled more in the capacity of the autocars, but they were found to be somewhat underpowered when operating in tandem like this. Great on the flat, and they could back up a fair turn of speed on the flat, 40, 50 miles an hour, but as soon as you've got that trailer on, or you start to go up a gradient, they began to lose power a little bit. So, great idea, great in theory. Perhaps the engines weren't quite up to the mark given the state of the technology. So there was, of course, another option, and that was full electrification. And about the same time, Raven was instrumental in developing the Tyneside electric network. Some of you are probably familiar with it. It's now the Tyne and Wear Metro, of course. But to give you an indication of why they did it, the Newcastle electric tramway system opened in 1902. And within those 2 years, the North Eastern Railway lost over 4 million passengers, 40% of the total. So that just shows the impact of the electric tramway upon what would have been a traditional sort of steam-operated system. So this was very much, again, at cutting edge, 600-volt DC third rail system. One of them still survives. And in fact, these were being used well up into the 1960s, I mean. So
You built a few new things.
yes, that's right. And so to actually maintain, something that was built in 1904 for the best part of 60 years, but a good return on your money, I think, would be the case. Okay. One of the big problems, of course, was actually obtaining the actual electrical kit, and they went to BTH to obtain that. There were 56 motor cars with 225 horsepower, 93 kilowatt motors, 2 motor parcel vans, and 44 trailers. Those saloons could run in 3-car. Oh, where have we heard that before? Oh, a metro, 3-car, or 8-car formations. And they first ran on the 29th of March 1904. So 120 years ago, give or take a few days. They were beaten just by the Liverpool to Southport EMU service, which was started by the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, which I'll say a little bit in a minute. It was extended to be a 20-mile circular route in 1909, had dedicated car sheds. As I said, the traction ran into the 1960s. Big problem they had in the late 20s, I believe, half of them were lost in a large, quite catastrophic fire in one of the in the car shed. So this is always one of the potential risks with action. Things tend to burst into flames if you're not careful. That might also be a bit of a recurring theme. So very, very successful system. By the 1970s, it was sort of down at its heel, and that was really the impetus then to create the Tyne and Wear Metro on the back of this really extremely successful system, which actually attracted a lot of people back to the railway, away from the trams. Okay, and here is, as I've just alluded to, Liverpool, Southport Electrics. Again, John Aspinall of the Lancashire and Yorkshire. He was chief mechanical engineer up until 1899 and then became the Lancashire and Yorkshire general manager. He was very much an advocate of enabling suburban routes to be electrified. Again, it used a free rail system with a return rail in the centre. Again, pretty much what we would expect to see an EMU to look like today. Okay, you've got the Edwardian styling, but effectively what we see there is effectively what's running on Merseyrail today. To all intents and purposes, it's virtually an identical system. There was massive investment, however. I think they put a completely new power station in at Formby, for instance, to actually enable this to happen. And it was a big investment for, again, 20 miles. But of course, it was all double track. Okay. And so effectively, it's sort of 46 miles of track were electrified. There's a Formby station, 3 substations. Power was again at 600 volt DC. The original cars were 60 foot long, 10 foot wide. So they were fairly hefty beasts, I think it'd be fair to say. By now, we're up to 150 horsepower motors, 600 horsepower for motor car. Braking was vacuum in this interface. As I said, you know, Edwardian styling, body, steel underframes. It also linked in with the Liverpool overhead railway in a couple of places. So it really was very much happening at the start of the 20th century. So coming now to South Wales, and this chap is now instrumental in taking things forward. Tom Hubby Riches, 1846, he died in 1911 in harness, I believe. Age 17, he joined the Taff Vale Railway as an apprentice at the local works. 1868, he then decided to do something else. He went off to join the Merchant Marine for a while, came back, got a scholarship at the Royal School of Mines. 1872, returned to the Taff Vale as chief locomotive foreman and promoted locomotive superintendent the following year. For a time, the youngest locomotive superintendent in Britain, and he stayed in that post until he died in 1911. He also moved away, not just dealing with locomotives, but he was also in charge of the carriage and wagon works, all the dredging machinery in the docks and the dock and coaling appliances. And just so he didn't get bored, he was also a JP. He was a director of the National Museum of Wales and the governor of 2 schools. I'm not quite sure where he found the time, but he was obviously a very busy and able chap. So he was very much instrumental in thinking about what can we do in South Wales, because he saw the Taff Vale Railway as an up-and-coming railway. It had a lot of money available to it. And with his general manager, Alan Beasley, he began to look at electrification of the Cardiff to Penarth route, mainly as a challenge to the forthcoming electric trams. By 1901, they knew that the trams were going to be electrified. As I said earlier, they came online in 1903. Various reports were prepared, and reports to the board were highlighted. You go through the minutes of the Taff Vale, and you can see some of these issues. One of the big problems with Cardiff to Penarth is it's very short. It's only really a 6-mile route, extended to Carrickstone, I suppose. But compared to the 20 miles of Southport to Liverpool, or the 20-odd mile circular route of the Tyneside Electrics, it was a very short route for such a high capital cost of investment in electrification. The running department said they needed at least 10 to 12 power cars to run such an intensive service. And the final deal breaker really was that the GWR owned a mile of the track into Cardiff. And the Great Western, although it was sort of almost forced to electrify the Hammersmith and City line to fit in with the Metropolitan and the District, they weren't actually that interested in the time in suburban electrification. They saw alternative means of bringing things forward. So really, the idea of electrifying Cardiff to Penarth route founded on these issues of high capital cost. the need for the power cars and this problem of not owning the last mile of traffic to Cardiff. So, but Howie Richards was not to be defeated, and he thought, well, what else can we do? So in 1902, so this is not hanging about, tenders were sought for a battery electric vehicle to operate Cowbridge to Aberfoyle. It would be a decent sized vehicle, 6 first, 10 second, 43rd class passengers. Again, the problem was we were only dealing with 6 miles from Cowbridge to Aberfoyle. And the cost in that respect made it actually quite expensive. £3,850 for a charging facility, working expenses £870 per annum. And again, the traffic department said, come on, guys, you know, if you're going to do this Cowbridge to Aberfoyle, let's do it for the whole of the Cowbridge branch from Lantrisson to Aberfoyle. That would require at least 2 to 3 vehicles, 3 recharging ports or stations at Aberfoyle, Cowbridge and Lantrisson to keep everything ticking along. There'd also either have to be investment in a standalone charging plant, or they'd be buying the electric from the local electric company. So again, it's sort of founded on the issue of providing that infrastructure to enable it to happen. Okay, but we don't quite know what the Taff Vale's battery electric car would have looked like. But storage accumulator cars, as they were called, were in development since the 1890s. This is a later example from Christchurch in New Zealand, and this may be more typical of what the Taff Vale had in mind. Weighed 32 metric tons, driving controls at each end, engine output of 90 kilowatts, and it could do a fairly respectable 40 miles an hour. And it bumbled along between Christchurch and one of the outlying areas, and was really very successful. Okay. So these are some very well-dressed, well-heeled people sat in that said electric car. So this is technology has advanced by this stage, so we're talking 20 years later. But 70 passengers again, so not dissimilar to what the Taff Vale had in mind. Had a range of about 100 miles on one charge, and it used imported Edison nickel-ion batteries. If you just go back a slide, sorry, you can see that basically all of the underside, the undercarriage is the battery. So everything's tucked away below floor level, and so basically it's just a big bank of cells underneath the floor. Covered 58-kilometre, 12-stop journey, very quiet, smooth acceleration, got up to 40 miles an hour quite happily, very popular, financially viable, but once again, the dreaded fire struck, and the car and its companion were destroyed in a depot fire in the early 30s. And because it had hit the time of the Great Depression and just coming out of depression, it was never actually, the service was never reinstated, which was a bit of a shame really, because it actually showed that battery electric cars could be run efficiently and viably. So the Taff Vale then went back to thinking about the North Eastern Railway. They'd been up to see available these petrol electric auto cars, and tenders were sought in January 1903 for a equivalent petrol electric rail car to run on the Taff Vale. The only specification I've been able to find was there was a requirement for 30 gallons of petrol. This isn't the Taff Vale petrol electric car, but this was a proposal by the Great Western at about the same time. So this is dated 1902, an outline drawing for what they thought a petrol electric rail car ought to look like. And it was probably in the same sort of vein, again, very much copying the influence from the North Eastern Railway. This was largely based upon a Dean 56-foot slip coach. So they were taking something that basically existed, adapting it to use it for petrol electric auto car use. So again, it was only a proposal, but if you just click, it probably would have looked something not dissimilar to that by the time it was finished. There was a suggestion that you want to move away from compartments to more saloons to try and get people in and out of the car as quickly as possible. So that's just a standard standard D chemistry coach, but it gives you some idea of what it may have looked like. But we don't quite know what the Taff Vale carriage would look, electric car and petrol car would have looked like. This was the alternative, if you like, to what was being proposed by the Great Western, which had been delivered by the North Eastern Railway. This is from 1904 and is a Daimler petrol rail car which was trialled on the Great Northern Railway. So they found it, again, quite efficient at a fair speed, but you're rather restricted in your passenger accommodation, and I'm not sure how fast I'd really want to go with it, to be perfectly honest. So it's so the technology was attached, and I think this was a petrol mechanical car rather than a petrol electric, so it had a gearbox and all the attendant problems associated with it. So again, it was, although tenders were sought, it all came to a little bit of a dead end. So if we jump on now, so Hurry Riches went back to steam. What can be done with steam to actually improve the service, boost frequency of services, so on and so forth. Now, in 1902, London and South Western Railway built 2 steam rail motors, which entered service in April 1903. So it's all happening around the same time. So this was to run on a really rather poorly used joint branch line with the London Brighton and South Coast Railway. And this is number 2 of that series. Number 1 was slightly different. But in essence, the idea was just to have a low-cost, lightweight rail car driven by steam, which could be used to both increase frequency and offer faster journey times. Relatively short, lightweight bogies, O2 to O sort of, so no coupling rods. So it's really sort of like the early days of, well, can we do something with steam to fill this gap with the sort of frequency of service which we're looking to achieve? Okay. So almost as soon as they were built, Hurry Riches and Nam and Beasley dashed down to see these at 9 Elms. So they went down in the latter half of 1902, and by the middle of June the following year, the TVR board had agreed a steam rail motor was the best way forward to actually deliver the sort of service improvements that Taff Vale was seeking to sort of compete with the trams. You also didn't have the problem of having to sort of try and fit things in around the coal traffic if you're going to electrify the line and so on and so forth. So they're very much seeing this as really a quick way forward, a quick win, if you like, to actually do what we want and get to where we want to get to. They initially approached London and South Western to supply parts. That didn't get anywhere. And in the end, Taff Vale motor car number 1 was built in-house. The engine portion was, I believe, the last locomotive built by the Taff Vale in West Yard Works, and the carriage portion was constructed at Cathays, with trials beginning in late 1903. So that's a pretty good turnaround from June agreeing to build it to it being available for testing in October. So not hanging about. Okay. Why go for the rail motor? Well, the report which Hurry Riches prepared highlighted quite a number of things. Easily reversed and quickly, just need the driver to walk from one end to the other. Purpose built for local passenger trains served by unmanned platforms. Well, this sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Develop more local traffic on existing lines, establish new services on lines without passenger services. So this is very much about increasing the network capacity and building those passenger miles. Just like Metroland in London, the suburbs of London, create opportunities for housing developments, which will support the line. So you put a station there or a halt, that actually creates the dynamic for housing developers to come in and say, we'll build next to that, because people have got easy access into the city centre. Even now, when we're talking about planning, we often say that a new station's worth about 1,000 homes. So to give that gives you some idea of the sort of context that a new station will have even today. compete with the trams and motor omnibuses, which are also beginning to appear on the roads at this time. Increased frequency of services instead of or additional to existing trains, which, as I've already alluded to, tends to be quite slow and rather unpleasant in many ways. And they were seen to be an economical way to provide services on those less well-used lines. A problem that's bedeviled the railway right the way or throughout the 60s and into the 70s and 80s. So many of the issues aren't altogether unsurprising. So here is Taffrail number 1. The carriage portion was 45 foot long, 8 foot 6 wide and gaslit, so not quite got the electric in yet. The first class compartment was 8 foot 11 long, third class 26 foot 1.5 inches long. Trailing bogie of 2 foot 10 inch wheels on an 8 foot wheelbase. The boilers were quite interesting. They weren't a side-on. Essentially, they had a central firebox with short boilers extending either side, and they had 9 by 14 inch cylinders with a relatively small tractive effort of 4,803 pounds. But it was a good starting point. Again, you will see the gates, which were again to encourage easy ingress and egress. So the idea was you could get to a station and get on quickly, get off quickly, and the whole idea was about rapid turnaround. Okay. So here's just another shot of number 1. It could seat 12 first class, 40 third class, and you have to compare that against a typical Taffrail train of the time. So the train would accommodate 24 first class, 22nd class, 120 third class. But you're now trying to base this against one train against a frequency of perhaps 4 or 5 railcar journeys. So what you lose in capacity, you make up for in frequency. So that was very much the idea behind it. Again, you'll see that this is an articulated set, a bit like the London and South Western one. So there was a pivot behind the engine portion. So the whole thing sort of swung on a pivot behind the engine to help try and dampen down some of the movement. Okay. So this was very quickly picked up by the press. So this is from the Western Mail from the 29th of October 1903. Today's experiment on the Taffrail line. The sketch of a steam motor coach which Taffrail Railway are going to experiment upon certain sections of their lines, etc., etc. So it went through quite a bit of trials. So from the end of October well into December, they were playing with this thing, seeing how it performed. The board minutes from the 1st December note that between Cardiff and Penarth and Carrickston, costs were just 40% of ordinary trains, whatever they may be. And so approval was given to start the service on the 21st of December 1903, just using this one car to begin with. So off it went, and they very quickly issued tenders for 6 more, which were awarded to Avonside and Bristol Wagon Co. So Avonside delivered the engine part of it, Bristol Wagon the coach part of it. They cost £2,047 10 shillings per car, with delivery in a very tight, or reasonably tight window between the 24th of May and the 22nd of July 1904. So that gives you a good idea of essentially the same vehicle. The only difference now, perhaps, compared to the original number 1, they've got slightly larger luggage compartments. And although we've still got a gate in the centre vestibule there, the gate at the end has gone and has been replaced by the door. So, but essentially, in all other respects and dimension-wise, they were identical to number 1, which the Taffrail itself had built. And very quickly, the services were expanded. So we were no longer just talking about Cardiff to Penarth and Carrickston. We now had Pontypridd to Nelson, which began on the 10th of October 1904, Pontypridd to Ynys-y-Bwlch on the 17th of October, a week later. Local services around Aberdare were turned over to the motor cars on the 26th of November. There were also a number of new stations for these services. Stations, in the loosest sense of the word. Some were rail level halts, others standard 40-foot long platforms, 3 feet high, some built of standardized cast iron parts. I think Robertstown, on the Innisable branch, the remains of a cast iron platform are still there, or they were until relatively recently. The average cost of the platforms to serve the motor cars was £165. I did look that up. I thought, well, how much would it cost to build a 40-foot platform today? Based on that price, it's £16,510. I'm not quite sure what it would cost really to build a platform that long. But there was a will to make it happen, and they didn't mess around.
And again, focusing on selling tickets on the train.
On the train, absolutely. None had facilities or were staffed. Although some stations became so successful, but in the end, little huts did appear, and they did start to sell tickets on the platforms. So it really was very basic. Here we've got the advert for Innisable from the Glamorgan Free Press 2 days before the launch of the service. Incredibly regular frequency, so 7:56, 8:52, 10:40, 12:03, 12:55. So we're looking 50-minute, 1 hour services from Pontypridd up to Innisable, which is actually really quite remarkable given the intention and possibly the actual passenger traffic which was up there.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind it was also competing with the coal traffic and so on and so forth.
Yeah, a lot long branch lines at this era with about 4 or 5 trains a day.
Absolutely. So this is incredibly regular service, and this was part of the intention was to create that market. What's quite interesting is this line here. Third class tickets only will be issued, and all first and second class bookings to, from, upon the Innisable branch will be discontinued. That's despite the fact that the motor cars have first and third class compartments. So you could buy your third class ticket and go and sort of languor in the luxury in first class on the motor car. So it just goes to show that there was serious intent behind making this work. It wasn't a half-hearted measure. And of course, on the Innisable branch, they opened 2 or 3 new halts to enable this traffic to really be promoted. Okay. But then the complaints began. And I have here, so I should read out. This is from the 31st of October 1904 and was a letter to the editor of the Evening Press. Sir, anyone who has had the misfortune to travel on the South Eastern Chatham Railway will not rashly condemn an enterprising line. But in my 10 years of travel on the Chatham, I have never experienced such a want of consideration as exists for Penarth passengers of the Taffrail Railway. We have the choice of dirty trains or steam motor cars. The most marvellous outcome of human ingenuity as applied to the railway engineering and management is the Taffrail Railway steam motor car. It is either very draughty or dreadfully stuffy, according to the weather. It jolts and jumps over the points like a thing possessed. It has a happy knack of overrunning its stopping place. It will seat only about 1/2 of its passengers, and even under the most favourable of circumstances will not be too many minutes late. But those who travelled on the 5:30 p.m. car this evening, it's the 31st of October 1904, so this is Mr. Irate, spent 10 minutes travelling to Dingle Road discussing who is responsible for running the cars, which will not seat more than 60 people, when morning after morning and night after night there are over 100 passengers to go by it. It is humorous to pay £7 per annum for a first-class season ticket, and for every other journey to be squeezed into the luggage compartment, or else left behind to await the next dirty train. To return to the tale of tonight's journey, we arrived at Dingle Road, and then the fun really commenced. The cars have a short iron lever placed in the most inconvenient position, which is supposed to raise and lower the steps. Dingle Road has no platform. It would cost too much, I presume. These steps have often struck me as a marvel of ingenuity, especially when watching a fat Taffrail guard struggling with the lever until the perspiration rolls off him. Well, after some trouble, the steps were lowered and the passengers alighted, but the guard then attempted to raise them, and after 3 or 4 futile attempts, another assisted him. But no, the lever would not budge. Then an official got down and examined the mechanism of the lamp and stated that the avoirdupois of human flesh in the car was jamming the rods underneath. We were asked to move to the other end of the car, which was an impossibility owing to it already being full. Many of us got off and watched these 2 poor fellows struggling with the monstrosity and pitied them. After some minutes, in which people were getting out and in, not knowing if they would get any further or not, away went this clean but slothful invention. I had not heard if it ever reached Penarth. In conclusion, I would say the 904 and 945 from Penarth are also always crowded out. When I was foolish enough to travel by the alternative of a dirty train, I could never get a seat, not even in the luggage compartment. The train often takes 50 minutes to cover 4 miles. So far from being efficient and frequent, there were very real issues. I would be glad if you could insert this letter to warn those thinking of residing in Penarth. I am, etc., a victim.
I also felt better after.
So he did, yes. No, he obviously got home and instantly sat down to write this, get this into the local mag. But it goes to show some of the issues which were beginning to emerge. They became very quickly victims of their own success. People almost were by preference were wanting to travel by the motor car, notwithstanding the obviously appalling riding which seems to have been attendant upon them. And because they were quicker, they were cleaner than the average Taffrail railway train, but they created problems. The Taffrail did take some of this on board, and so they converted some great thirds into trailer units. They were rather heavy and cumbersome and not really ideal because they were the weight which was almost the equivalent of the motor car itself. So you were creating a problem almost for yourself by attempting to do this. Instead of designing something else which was lightweight and perhaps more suitable. But they did put windows in the front end to try and boost the capacity of the motor cars. It was a real problem for these early ones. The sort of numbers 1 to 7 really struggled with the trailers which the Taffrail provided. They just didn't really have the power to either maintain the service or keep things going because they were just so heavy.
It's not exactly a level railway you're talking.
No, exactly, and of course you're sort of going up the in a support branch or up to Nelson particularly, which I think was really quite steep.
Yeah.
But and having something like this up front, well, we like coming down here, I suppose, but going up here, yes, not the best of options. But at least they were trying to do it. So the Taffrail thought, well, we're going to have to do something about this. So they then went and invested in 6 more cars in November 1904. They awarded that contract to Kerr Stewart and the Bristol Wagon Co. Bristol Wagon Co. again providing the carriages. And in a change from the earlier ones, all the carriages were now all third seating 48. But in true Taffrail fashion, they had a massive falling out over the provision of these motor cars, and there were all sorts of threats of legal action against Kerr Stewart and Bristol Wagon Co. and so on and so forth. They almost didn't pay for them, and then goodness knows what. But again, they were the same sort of articulated unit, so the loco could be separated from the carriage portion relatively easily. Same sort of wheel arrangement, and to all intents and purposes, almost identical, other than we've now lost that first class saloon section of the carriage portion. So they did arrive, but even more followed in 1905. These were, this time they said, oh, well, we're not going to go to Kerr Stewart, just fallen out with them. So they went to Manning, Wardle and Brush instead. 5 engines, 3 carriages. So by now they were thinking about having spares. So they wanted 2 extra engine units to actually rotate things through, to keep the carriage portions in operation, but allow them to rotate out the engines. These were numbered 14 and 18, or at least the engine parts were numbered 14 to 18. Now much longer carriages, 56 foot as opposed to 45, and the overall length had increased to 70 foot 3 7/8 of an inch. Bigger cylinders, increased tractive effort. So they're really trying to get around this problem of power and trailers. Wheels were 3 foot 6 in diameter, and they were delivered really for use on the Penarth branch, probably in light of these sort of island comments, to really try and get people back on board. They were delivered in 1906, and they returned to 16 first class and 57 third class passengers, so back-to-back composite type of system. So this shows the large motor cars, much bigger engine units, so it's got that extra power to it. But again, that sort of central firebox with two side barrels, longer car, double doors to again allow the third class to get out rather more quickly, and a wider door far end for first class use. So really pushing to try and get the residents of Penarth back on side, I think would be a fair description. So if you just go to the next one, this gives you an idea of their appointment. So lower left is not surprisingly third class perhaps, but rather different approach to the first class saloon, which is split into smoking and non-smoking as well. So I'm not quite sure whether the 398s are quite as well appointed as that.
Okay, yeah. Thinly disguised wooden seats.
But it goes to show that they really were actually listening perhaps to some of these complaints. Obviously, a lot of business directors, so on of them, lived in Penarth at the time. And so, you know, these people had very often they were probably shareholders at the Taffy, so they needed to at least attempt to keep them on side. So, so this was really very much the sort of approach for Taffy to get something more powerful, bit bigger, can accommodate more people, and can more easily tow or push a trailer as part of increasing the third class off. Okay. It reached the point where Harry Bridges was sufficiently excited about the development of the motor cars, but in 1906 he co-authored an 81-page paper examining the development not only of suburban networks, but also the effectiveness and efficacy of the railway motor cars. It is available. It's in the proceedings of the IMechE. It's volume 71. It is actually quite a good read. Even all 81 pages of it. You'll see that suburban turns up a few times, even on the first page here. So they've looked at electrification, they've looked at different options, and so you know, this was trying to identify the way of taking it forward. And it really is quite an interesting paper. He looked with his co-author not only at the Taff Rail, but also at various other rail motors which were coming on stream across the networks, not only in the UK, but also overseas. What is quite interesting, if you go on to the next slide, is that it shows some performance data as well. So this is for the Taff Rail steam car to seat 73 persons, and this is the speed data from Pontypridd to Cardiff Queen Street. So it shows the acceleration, the slowing down for Treforest, Taff Swell, Ladder, Llandaff, and then into Cardiff Queen Street. Not unshabby graph, I don't think. It actually shows pretty decent turn of acceleration and quite rapid deceleration as well, I think, particularly into Llandaff by the looks of it. It would be interesting to rerun this journey with a 398 and see what that graph would look like. But it goes to show that quite a lot of thought was going into the performance of these things. It was all downhill. Exactly. So we got the gradient here. So there are, to be fair, other performance graphs in the paper. So so it is worth a read. I say it's 81 pages long. I do have a copy, so if anyone is interested, I can always circulate the PDF. So No, that's okay. So the motor car service by 1907 was really quite extensive, and this is just for the Taff Vale. Aberdare, Mill Street to low level, so that's a little circuit around Aberdare. Queen Street to Pontypridd, from Butetown up to Maindee, Cardiff, Penarth, Cadoxton, Pontypridd to Nelson, Innisable Branch, Lantriston to Cowbridge, Abertlaw, all the way up to Pontypridd. So new stations were put in at places like Tonteg, Pontypridd to Treherbert, and then Pontypridd to Aberdare. So really quite an extensive network aiming to both promote traffic and encourage people to use the motor cars, despite potential shortcomings. So we'll just leave the Taff Vale here. So this is just a fine image of number 6, again with a trailer, but it just goes to show they were quite impressive machines when one looks at them. But now we need to think about some of the other companies in South Wales. Okay. So whilst the Taff Vale was by far the most prolific user of steel line motors, next on the scene was a rather different affair. The ADR had absorbed the Pontypridd, Caerphilly and Newport Railway in 1897, and in 1904, so only a year after Taff Vale, it introduced a motor car service with 2 rail motors between Pontypridd Tram Road Station and Caerphilly. Again, similar sort of dimensions to the Taff Vale units, 9 by 14 cylinders, tractive effort in the same sort of ballpark. But if we just jump to the next slide, oh sorry, and this was again, trying to boost the traffic. So this goes to show the sort of frequency of service they were going to operate with these motor cars. So again, it's just about an hour and 15 minutes apart, something like that, an hour and 20 minutes. So again, a good frequent service on what would otherwise probably be a relatively underutilized line. Again, we saw rail level halts being installed on the PCN to actually engender this traffic. So there's not a great deal of infrastructure involved in getting this service up and running. So this should serve next one. So this shows what they look like, a bit of a poor quality slide. But what was quite interesting was, rather than being an articulated unit like those used on the Taff Vale, the engine was now integrated within the carriage compartment. This was ordered in 1904. This was a non-articulated unit, a bit longer, 58 foot 6 inches long, although it's now got the engine part within it. But again, 56 passengers in a single saloon. So that's number 1, and the next slide should show number 2, which is a rather more elegant affair, I think. Again, non-articulated, but now had a rather smart clerestory roof, longer again, 64 foot 11, wider vestibules, again, to help people get in and out. Could seat 54 passengers. So these chugged along quite happily for quite a few years on the PCN, running the Alexandra Dock service up to Pontypridd from Caerphilly. And so it goes on. So the next one is the Barry. They, a year later, 1905, purchased again 2 non-articulated units from North British, who provided the engine, and Pickering's, who provided the carriage body. 60 foot, 10.5 inches long, 8 foot 11 wide. Slightly fewer passengers, so seated 50, 10 first class, 40 in third class. But quite elegant machines, I would say. The difference we now have as well is these are now beginning to reflect a bit more, which I haven't touched on at all, Great Western practice. You've got an 040 engine unit as opposed to the 022 system employed by the Taff Vale and LSWR before that. So we're looking to actually boost the power output from the engine unit to support the vehicle. Okay. And compared to what had gone on earlier in South Wales, they were actually quite powerful. 12 by 16 inch cylinders, tractive efforts almost doubled, good water capacity, 500 gallons, fairly, well, probably sort of akin to a 153, what was 153, 44 tons, something like that. So similar sort of ilk. This was their biggest problem though, their coal capacity, only 1,500 weight. And that was really their sort of downfall, because they tended to sort of run out of steam, run out of coal before they got to where they wanted to get to. But things had moved on quite a bit. They had a dynamo, so they were electrically lit, bigger driving wheels, and all in all, they were much more comfortable and less prone to the shake, rattle, and roll, which we referred to earlier on the Taff Vale. So on the whole, not unpleasant machines. Okay, and they tended to work initially from Cardiff to Barry to Bridgend, so effectively the Vale of Glamorgan line, but in later years they also worked up from Barry to Pontypridd. So again, centred on Barry has been the centre of the Barry Railway network. Okay. Now this beast really is a beast. It's sort of like a standout thing, which was purchased in 1906 by the Port Talbot Railway. Hawthorne Leslie provided the engine part of it, and a coach by Hurst Nelson, and that's effectively a standard, almost a standard industrial 060 engine encased within bodywork to make it look like part of the carriage. So quite a huge machine. So it had a standard sort of boiler, nothing to, but it was almost reversed. So you can see the cylinders here. There's the chimney of the engine. So it was effectively a locomotive encased in bodywork. Incredibly long, 73 foot 10 inch overall, 9 foot wide, seated 66 to 70 passengers, 20 in smoking, 32 in non-smoking, and they could cram some people into the 7 foot luggage compartment if they so desired. So, which also had seats. So again, it was designed very much to provide that flexibility. You can put your luggage in there, but you can go and sit in there as well if we're busy, sort of thing. So quite a hefty machine, which was purchased by the Port Talbot Railway in 1906. As I said, 060 loco unit, again, larger cylinders, 12 by 16, fairly hefty tractive effort now, pushing 10,000 pounds. Much bigger water capacity, 700 gallons, 20 hundredweight coal capacity, again electrically lit. And this had a fair turn of speed again, so we're up to 40 miles an hour, but it did drop quite quickly to 22 on gradients of 1 in 100, and it got to rather less than that as it got steeper. So as it was heading up the valley, it sort of quite literally started to run out of puff, I think would be a fair description. But down here, it had a fair old turn of speed by all accounts. Okay, and that operated between Port Talbot Central and Blaengowan. So again, up the valley and providing that service to an area which perhaps otherwise wouldn't have had much of a service at all, if any. So it was really an attempt to create that business. Okay. Rumney were next on the scene. They purchased 2 identical units in 1907 from Hudswell Clark with coach portions by Cravens. They were designed by Howie Rich's son, Carlton Howie Rich's, and he went for a different tack again. We're back to being an articulated unit, but now we've got something that's perhaps more akin to a real, in inverted commas, locomotive at the front. And this was very much designed for use on the Llangennith branch and areas around Caerphilly, which was obviously at the heart of the Rumney Railway network. Okay. Again, 12 by 16 inch cylinders, pretty decent sized tractive effort, not quite as good as Port Talbot Railway. 700 gallons were held in tanks, and those cylindrical tanks, just go back. Those cylindrical tanks actually held the water supply. So 700 gallons of water. Okay. Again, 20 hundredweight coal capacity, electrically lit, 64 passengers, with again those wide access doors to enable people to get in and out very quickly. Okay. And I found that's really quite a nice picture. So when they were new, they really did look quite smart, I thought. Again, you got this 040 arrangement, and they really did look quite elegant when new. They look quite powerful machines, I think, with that sort of front approach to them. Okay. But they had an appalling ride. So very, very quickly they were rebuilt, and you can just make out on this postcard
At 4.2, isn't it?
It's now an 042, so they actually improve, they extended the frames, it's now an 042. That solved the problem, and they went on to be really quite successful. They were running sort of quite long distances, in fact. So, Caerphilly to St. Gennet and Machen isn't that far, but Rugni to Ystrad Mynach and Ystrad Mynach to Merthyr, that sort of horseshoe loop up the top end of the valley of the old Rugni and Great Western Joint Line to Merthyr, through Aberfan and such like. That's actually quite a lengthy journey, and they did seem to sort of hold their own quite successfully for some time in this modified form. So after these initial teething problems, they were rebuilt within literally 3 or 4 months of entering service because of the they were that bad, yes. But then they
Steps for ground level entry.
well, they then went on to have quite an interesting and varied life. Okay, and finally, in South Wales, rather later on the scene, we had the Cardiff Railway and they purchased 2 almost identical units from 1911 from Gloucester, along with 2 trailer units. So they were very much designing it with expansion in mind, very much based upon Great Western styling. In fact, the Gloucester company had actually built some steam rail motors for the Great Western before this, so they had the know-how. 65 foot long, 9 foot wide, 64 passengers in first, 16 in first, 48 in third class. So very much that sort of thing, but with the trailers as well, with trailers designed to run with them, I think, which is an important point. They were lightweight trailers, which actually then made them a sensible sort of unit to actually increase capacity very quickly. So very much thinking ahead, I suppose, in many ways. Okay, so again, not quite so great. Tractive effort, so it's dropped down a bit, but 12 by 16-inch cylinders. Water capacity was again a bit low, it was under 500 gallons, but now we have a very decent coal capacity of 30 hundredweight. One thing we have to bear in mind, these were only really running between Vidvelin and Cardiff Parade. So they were just shuttling backwards and forwards along up through the Corriton and the Tom Widlice up the Tap Valley. So relatively gentle ground, if you like, compared to some of the other lines operating, and so they were able to perhaps compromise water capacity a bit in favour of coal and to actually operate a halfway decent service. Also drawing on standard Gloucester parts as well, which again sort of help keep the cost down. But that gives a good example of the Gloucester boiler, which was installed in the Cardiff rail motors. So okay. So, and as I said, that operated from the Rumney railway station at Cardiff Parade up to Heath Low level and then on to Corriton and Vidvelin. So quite elegant, rather nice vehicles, I would say. And they certainly stood the test of time for quite a while, which I'll come on to in just a moment. Okay, so this is a map which the Circle prepared a few years ago, showing the network of passenger lines across South Wales. I've cut it down a little bit so we can get at least a sense of where we are. So Cardiff's down in here, Pontypridd, Port Talbot, up to Merthyr, up the top there. So it gives you a sense of just the network of lines which had passenger services on them before 1922. So if you just press one more. In 1903, this was the Taffdale motor service from Penrexton and Penarth into Cardiff, going down to Riverside Station. So that was very much it at the time. Okay, but by beginning of 1912, we had this. I said I'd come back to the network map. So by 1912, we had really an extensive network of high frequency, quite efficient services operating across large parts of the passenger network of South Wales. There were a few outliers, that's the Port Talbot to Blaengarry line, but Treherbert, Merthyr, Municipal, Nelson, they didn't quite interlink, but goes to show the efforts which were made to actually bring forward these services across South Wales. So I think that's sort of quite interesting in and of itself when you compare that with that second or third slide I showed of the core valley lines, which are now being brought forward by the New South Wales Metro. Okay, but it didn't last. By 1913, the Taff Vale was losing interest in their rail motors. Tom Hoey Riches, had been dead for 2 years by this stage. He died in 1911. Poor riding was leading to increasing numbers of complaints. The carriages were getting extremely dirty as the motor cars were serviced on a daily basis in the steam loco sheds. So there were some chaps there shoveling coal in and whilst you were trying to keep the carriage clean. The lack of capacity and the inability to pull trailers was very much an issue. They never got round this problem. They still needed free staff to operate: driver, fireman, guard in the carriage. So although the guard was issuing tickets, still needed free staff to operate the trains. They're becoming increasingly unreliable. Maybe hot boxes, again, partly due to lack of maintenance. Also, having those wheels with their sort of journals behind the wheels, causing increasing numbers of problems. And then we got into the impact of World War I, and by 1916, there are no more records of the TVRs being in service, the TVR motor cars being in service. Probably, they reached the end of, they're coming towards the end of their life. It wasn't worth replacing the engine parts of them. So by 1922, all of the carriage parts of the motor cars have been converted to auto trailers. So bit of a loss, but it had probably reached its length, its natural lifetime because of the problems which were becoming embedded now in technology, which, although only 10 years old, in some instances were starting to struggle under the strain, I think would be fair to say. Okay.
Because back then, things like diesel engines and petrol engines had come a huge way by the end of the World War.
That's right, exactly. On the other lines, the Barry Railway numbers 1 and 2 just struggled into 1912 before they too were converted into trailers. As I said, their problem was mainly lack of coal capacity, especially when running on the Vale of Glamorgan line. The ADR managed to hang on a bit longer, so almost to the end of the number 1, almost lasted to the end of the First World War. Again, they had shortages of manpower to try and keep these things on the road, so to speak. Although number 2, the nice Cleverstream rail car, was actually converted to a trailer in 1911 to match those with the Barnum and Bailey Cleverstreams which they purchased. The Port Talbot Railway 1 was withdrawn in October 1916, but then had a second life with the Port of London Authority, where it survived until 1926. The Rumney Railway rail motors are quite interesting. Number 1 outlasted the war, but number 2 was withdrawn in 1910. They were converted. The loco component was converted into an 060 locomotive, both of them, while the carriage portions were turned into trailers. And the locos had probably another 10 years of life. I think they just about lasted into Great Western. Well, it lasted into Great Western days, and they provided workmen's trains into Caerphilly Works and so on and so forth. The Cardiff Railway from 1911, they lasted until 1920, when again they were converted into a trailer pair alongside trailers 3 and 4. These are all quite short timescales when compared with the Great Western steam rail motors, which I think lasted up until about 1934. But did we have a missed opportunity in 1900, 1902? Here we see one of the northeastern rail cars. If this technology had been persevered with, either a petrol electric rail car or electrification had been persevered with at the turn of the 20th century, would we have had a different network in South Wales today compared to what the rump we've got left? There are obviously opportunities there to make it work, and the frequency of services which were achieved by the rail motors and the fact they tended to be overcrowded does rather suggest that if if the right technology had been used or promoted at the time, then perhaps some of this might still be going today. So, for instance, the Cardiff Railway up to be that has survived if it's been electrified rather than they never had the money, one has to admit, but if there other alternatives have been pursued more actively at the time, would we have had a slightly different network to that which we see today? Okay, and in fact, okay, you know, incredibly, one of the North Eastern Rail petrol autocars is still with us. It's for body only. It's on a different underframe. It's now fitted with a diesel engine because I get rather upset about petrol running in Belfast. But the fact that here we are, 120 years later, that piece of infrastructure still survives suggests that the principle, at least, was probably inherently sound. And as we know, the Great Western did go on to develop, you know, the diesel rail car and the diesel multiple units as a consequence. So they went down a slightly different route, and which led to the British Railways DMU, so on and so forth. Okay. So some thoughts for the future. We've had a look back at what happened at the start of the 20th century. What do we need to do to think about our new metro for the future? We need it to be an integrated network, not separate companies doing their own thing. We need some sort of consistency. So I think we can tick that box. Own the lines to speedily enable changes. One of the big problems was you were trying to work around various coal traffic and so on and so forth. That's all now gone. So yes, I think we tick that box. Standalone dedicated facilities for maintenance. Well, we don't have a problem now of trying to sort of manage a steam rail motor with coaling with a carriage still attached. So that, I think we can tick that box. However, we need to make sure that there's proper fire suppression systems for battery and electric operation, because we'd hate to see the Taffs Rail Depot go up in smoke. I think this is important. Have we genuinely built in sufficient capacity into the metro system? Are 36 tram trains really going to be enough?
I'm sceptical.
Because if we do increase the frequency, we're going to increase popularity. That goes without saying. So are we really getting on top of that one? That's possibly the most important thing we need to think about. Keeping costs down. Can we build a 40-foot platform for £16,510? Or the
165 pounds.
Yeah, or you know, all the equivalent today. You know, we need to plan and invest in the infrastructure for the long term. How long do genuinely do those masts which are going on? What is their life expectancy? We saw the North Eastern Railway system lasting for over 60 years. Are we expecting the metro infrastructure to last for 60 years? And finally, frequent service with good acceleration. It's actually all about accelerating the services to they actually work and deliver what people genuinely want if you're going to have that integrated network. So I think there's some really important messages or some thoughts from the past to consider into the future as the South Wales Metro continues to evolve. So I think that, just one more, I think. Yep, so after almost 125 years, are we actually seeing the arrival of a genuine metro system, which perhaps could have been delivered at the start of the 20th century if the will was there? It probably wasn't quite the right conditions, but are we there now? I think we shall have to wait and see. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Have we got any questions?
No, not on here.
Hey?
Not on here.
No questions online. Any questions in the door?
I got a few online actually.
Oh, good. Who's that?
Hello. Yes, it's Phil Toogood. I am friend of Brian Mills.
Hello, Phil.
Hi there. I meant to try and come down in person. I just couldn't get away from the office, so it's good to watch it anyway. First off, when you started off, I was fascinated to find out these trains are made by Stadler, for example. They're actually one of my customers. I designed the couplings to go on the trains. I wasn't aware, to be honest, until it just twigged. So I've actually designed the drive couplings to go on these things. So it's interesting to know I've had a part in making these things, I suppose. And I also, obviously, I work in Cardiff, but I live up in Aberdeen, so I'd pass this place every day. I've become sort of not so much fascinated, but I suppose I was fascinated with it. But I see it every single day, and it's nice to see it actually so much going on, whether it's the infrastructure or the depots, especially. I'm usually sat in the traffic next to it for a couple of minutes. But it would be nice to sort of start, seeing it, actually getting around to using it. So it's nice to see it is actually coming alive finally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, I saw certainly one of these on the Lumley train as I was coming in today. So they are being rolled out quite quickly now.
Yeah, I think they're taking over the Rumney site in Cardiff now.
And they will migrate to the Maesteg to Cheltenham service now.
Yeah.
That's what they're really there.
Well, they've started to appear now as well.
Yes.
As well as the 170's gone off lease.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Thank you for that. So, any other questions?
Just one other question. Obviously, you're only starting to go live now, obviously. But I mean, I get people asking me about any expansions and things. Obviously, you're only about going live now. But there's questions about there's obviously a number of lines that are still in place where there is no passenger service at all. Is there any talk of extending to other certain places like Hirwaun, for example, or the back end of Nelson, where the track is still there, but there's no services?
I think you'd have to ask Transport for Wales in detail, but certainly the Hirwaun business case is not sufficient yet to reintroduce. But what they are doing is protecting the route up to Hirwaun, and likewise some of the other lines which have closed. So there's an aspiration to go to Abertillery. So with the recent works in the Ebbw line, passive provision has been made for the junction. To reconnect a line to Abertillery. So there is a longer term plan. I think times are quite hard at the moment, so it might take a bit longer to move on. But certainly there is the key thing with the whole thing is it's an integrated plan. So, buses are intended to meet trains, etc., etc. So
yeah.
So we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, the other thing is there any talk of in between Cardiff and Newport, for example? I mean, I work near the Freightliner site, and it'll take about 3 hours for me to get to work by public transport at the moment, as it stands, because of the combinations of buses and the various trains I have to get. I know there has been talk many times about building something on near the Freightliner site many years ago. Whether that's still on the boil or anything.
Yeah. There's a lot of long-term planning going. Right, so
Yes, 2 points really. Have you ever come across Professor Narcon, who Mark Barry cites in his 2011 papers on where he really launches the existing, the current metro effort?
I have seen some of them, yes, but I've not really read them in detail. I must confess, I owe a lot to one of our circle members, John Lewis, who was very much interested in the steam rail motor side of things. I haven't dwelt, to be honest, a great deal on the rationale behind the South Wales Metro, other than those sort of brief introductory slides. Which
Professor Narcon put forward a publication by Cardiff University in
Right.
1936, very much invoking, I think, the Bright Line.
Yes,
So he was bringing technology up to date with a big bang.
that's it. Yes, exactly.
So those steam things.
Yes.
Absolute contraptions.
They were, and it was really probably a bit of a false start in some respects.
Yeah.
If I think part of the problem was the length of lines involved. I mean, both Lancashire and Yorkshire and the North Eastern said 20 miles. We need 20 miles of track to actually make this worthwhile with the
other BSCI stopped 50 miles in London, right?
That's right. So that was probably almost your minimum. Now, so trying to start with Cardiff to Penarth or Cadoxton was probably a bad starting point anyway.
Yeah.
And of course, if they'd actually decided to electrify up the Rhondda Valley, then it would have caused such massive disruption to the coal traffic that their shareholders, I'm sure, wouldn't have entertained it being possible, even though they could possibly have hauled more coal trains with an electric locomotive, like the big ones the North Eastern Railway actually built for coal traffic down the line. It just wasn't quite the right scenario. What did I think come across quite nicely was there were the beginnings of these emerging hubs. So Cardiff, Pontypridd, Caerphilly, to a lesser extent Barry, and perhaps in hindsight something could have been done based around one or more of those hubs to actually start to get the ball rolling back in the early parts of the 20th century. But again, it wasn't to be.
I think the most likely real tram train use will be extending the Bay line through the Bay area past County Hall and all that, along the Pengam line up to where the proposed Newport Road station.
That's it. Yes, exactly. Yes. So
using that freight line.
that's right.
Some street running sections.
Yeah. So there will be, I'm sure, as this thing develops, and I suspect it will very quickly get to capacity because people will start using it like fury, which is why.
Well, and that's the challenge we had when we reopened to Aberdare. That got overwhelmed fairly quickly.
Exactly.
Couldn't cope with it. Every Vale, which was only a few years, have now actually done a lot more track doubling to increase capacity. So I think that definitely these, I think the only one that's never really worked was the Swan line, but I don't think we've ever run enough trains on it. But yes, I think they have been victims of their own success, and you do need to build about, even if you don't build the full capacity on day one, you need to make provision for
Absolutely
to do it later. Yeah. All right, any more questions? Online, Philip?
No.
Karen?
Sounds like the property side is Andy and Philip mentioned. Are there any, there's more infrastructure going in to the electrical side of it, but and there's still freight running potentially on some of these lines, isn't there? But it's a cost saving in the infrastructure management if they're running a lighter railway. It would be running.
There is, and I mean, freight's effectively finished now in the valleys, hasn't it?
Well, it used to go up the Rumney, didn't it? I think they've got.
Yeah, but the last coal train's gone. There's some ceremonies recently, and I can't see them reopening coal mines in the valleys. So once it's converted to a tram system, it won't be compatible with normal trains.
Can I just wave a little flag there?
Yeah.
That we had Phil Kirkland talking here a few years ago on his experiences on the Tyneside Metro.
Yeah. Because it was their track engine.
And
What's there?
on the subject of are there any economies in track, his answer was be careful.
Yeah.
Because of the culprits about weight, we are the culprit because it's our ballast trains and our rail trains that cause lots and lots of problems on Tyne and Weir Metro.
Yeah, also, if you buy a small rail section, which isn't popularly used, you pay a premium for it. So even though you're using a lighter rail, you're paying probably back. So if you adopt 756 rail or 754 rail, which is rolled in vast quantities in Europe, it's probably cheaper than having a lighter rail rolled for you. So you need to be careful on what the market drives. But yes, it certainly will change. I mean, bridge capacity and things like that will be a big advantage because we've got potentially huge life left in these bridges now. We're no longer operating heavy locomotives and coal trains over them. So, we'll be able to extend the life of them and things like that quite a lot. And there are big advantages there. All right, any more questions? All right, as time is getting on, so can I call upon Andrew to propose the vote of thanks?
Yeah, if I may, I want to take a little bit of time because I'm going to address this in two bits.
Really Welsh.
The first bit is to talk about how I came to know Adrian, who I've met for the first time this evening. And the reason for that. And then the second bit is really to comment about Adrian's talk. The first bit is, I don't know, 18 months ago, an email arrived in my inbox from Adrian and the Welsh Railways Research Circle, saying that they were going to publish Brian Mills's book about Aberthaw cement, lime and railways.
railway, yes.
And were the PWI interested in supporting that publication because they'd cost, I don't know, Adrian can comment in part of his response. And that went on as a correspondence with PWI at the Centre for quite a few, well, went on for about a year actually, at the end of COVID. And yes, I'm hoping that we're still going to do that. Since then, of course, Brian has sadly passed away. And really that's the genesis of where this talk came from. So thanks very much to Brian for introducing me to Adrian, and just as a mark of respect, you know, we should all think about Brian and what he did for the railways and what he was for signalling. Although he wasn't a signaller, he wasn't a railwayman, in fact, but he was in heart, and that was absolutely great. So thanks, Brian, up there, down there, wherever he is. We think about you.
Yeah.
And the talk tonight about South Wales Metro. South Wales Metro is centred on Cardiff. There's also a little railway centred on Swansea, which is Surrey, and there's another one centred on Wrexham. So they're slowly developing as metro systems in Wales. And what do we do about Newport? Take that onto
Newport's part of Cardiff.
take that onto the Wales system as well, I think. But what's interesting about Cardiff is that I'm sorry, but I think the problem is still there. That we've got two systems. We've got the Great Western and the Taff Vale arguing about a mile track at the turn of the 20th century. And really, we've still got the same problem between Network Rail and Transport for Wales. We're getting interrelated working is still a slight problem, perhaps not as much as it used to be, getting into and out of Cardiff Central Station. Because why can't we get wires to Penarth? Why can't we get wires to Barry via the Vale? Leave that thought with you. But one interesting thought that came to me this evening or this afternoon when I was looking out of the window here, when I first came to Cardiff, working in the engineer's office in 1971, the area between us and the station was still Cardiff Riverside Station.
Yeah.
And where we are now is actually on the site of Riverside Branch.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago, the first and second floors would have been taken by a track with little steam autos shuffling backwards and forwards
Into Riverside.
down the branch. So interesting little thought. And you make a comment about the Penarth branch and being too popular and passengers sitting and overloading presumably the frames, and then the steps don't go down. Interesting little thought, but Mike on the train. What goes around comes around, and I remember in Taiwan in the 90s where they were wanting to test load their new metro trains with passengers, but didn't have any passengers. So they loaded them with sandbags, and then they had an argument with the train manufacturers, and they left the sandbags in the train for too long. With the net result that they reformed the frames on the units. So yeah, interesting things. And I'm interested in your thoughts for the future. Have we got enough capacity? Let's get them running first. Let's get the passengers in them. Get a few complaints and resolve the problems. For the future, I'll just say one thing. With the road speeds in South Wales, the whole of Wales going down to 20, perhaps there is future for rail where they can go at 40 and 60. And the 470 probably will slowly come down as the traffic increases. Adrian, thanks very much for a thought-stimulating talk going back 100 years. There's so much to learn, and thanks for bringing it all to our attention. Can I ask you all and those online to join me in the usual way?
Thanks very much, guys.
Just one thing quickly, Phil Toogood has posted a comment on here. Thanks for paying tribute to Brian Mills once again. I'm still working on fine tuning his final book on the FOD.
Forester D.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
And hope to release it before long.
Yeah. Right, any issues arising from the minutes of the last meeting? Which was circulated in the newsletter, so they went round in the newsletter. So, no, okay, we'll take them as read then. Okay, so without further ado, I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
your attention.
Good. Hi, Tim. I love the complaint.
Yes, it's fantastic.
The language is splendid.
Yes, it is, absolutely. I just have to, when I'm going to have it, I just have to eat this out.
Yeah, no, it's done.
Thank you. Good morning.